and welcome to Grand Cuisine. Today, we're going to light our Lacunza Clasica, and we're going to do some cooking right on our cooktop. So come and join us. So let's start by lighting our Lacunza Clasica wood-burning stove. First thing we want to do is check our dampers. So we make sure that our dampers, both top and bottom, are in the complete open position. We also want to make sure the bypass valve is in the closed position. And then also, if you have a chimney or flue damper, you want to make sure that that is in the open position as well. So, to light our stove, what I do is I start with a small, intense fire toward the rear of the firebox. And so I'm going to go ahead and begin to build that. The first thing I want to do is make sure that our airways are not obstructed. So I'm going to take my rake and just kind of rake through and make sure that all of our slots are open and ready. Then I have a combination of twigs and a fire starter and some small kindling, and then what I like to call some heat chunks that I'm going to build my fire with. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my sticks in the very back corner of the firebox. And then I'm going to add in my fire starter here. I'm going to bury that right into that pile of sticks. And then I'm going to put just a couple pieces of my kindling right over the top, giving it lots of air, kind of crisscrossing. Now, the reason that I do this is because when you are lighting a stove like this, your first primary objective is to get heat up into the flue. And the best way to do that is with an intense small fire so you can begin to heat the chimney, get that smoke out, and begin to heat that firebox. I like to heat from the back to the front. So I also use a propane torch to do my initial start for heat fire instead of like a match or even a fire lighter, because I get a lot of heat and I get a good burn very quickly. So we're going to turn this on, and then I'm simply going to bring it in, and I'm just going to hold it right toward that fire starter, right in there, and get a good flame going so that I get lots of good intense heat. So you can see that now I'm getting a really nice start to my fire. I'm going to start just a little bit on the other side as well. Put a little bit more heat there. And then this will give us a really, really good start. So there we go. So we're going to let this build up, and I'm going to allow it to begin to aerate, to get some good oxygen, and they begin to really develop into a nice fire. So now you can see that our fire is really beginning to catch on. We're getting some good heat toward the back of our firebox, going up into the flue, heating that up nicely. So now I can start to build on that fire. So I'm going to take what I call some of my heat chunks, and these are really just small pieces of oak or hickory, and we're going to add them in. Now, if you notice, what I don't do is I don't start with large logs of wood initially. I like to build the fire up, give it some real oxygen. I've got lots of good oxygen going on in here between the grates, between the door open. You can see we've got very little smoke coming up. Just shows how well built the Lacunza Clasica is, and it takes that smoke right away. And so we're just building up that heat. So I'm going to shut my door just a little bit, allow the oxygen to continue, allow it to build on that heat chunk, and then we're going to build from there. So now it's been about 5 minutes or so. We've got a good fire started. So now we're ready to start building on that fire. So I'm going to put in my first log, which is kind of a smaller piece, not very thick, but is going to really begin to build onto that fire. So I'm going to put that in at a nice angle and then let that really begin to catch. So what we're using is a combination of oak and hickory. These are both woods that have a very high BTU rate. Of course, a BTU is a British thermal unit, which is actually the heat of one match. So interesting to note, a cord of oak wood will yield 29 million BTUs. So that's a really, really high heat intensity. So we do a combination of smaller and larger pieces of wood. And then as I showed you earlier, I've got my heat chunks that we'll be using throughout to kind of add to the fire, bring up the heat very quickly, and we'll talk about management of the firebox. So now it's been about 15 minutes. We have a really good roaring fire in our firebox, and we're ready to close everything up and begin cooking. So I'm going to start by completely closing my oven door. I'm going to take my bottom damper and I'm going to dial it to about 20% open. I'm going to keep my upper damper open completely, and then I'm going to adjust that as I want heat to come in. Of course, the more air coming into the firebox, the more heat that we derive, but also the quicker that we burn our wood. So the slower the air, not as much heat, but the longer burn time for wood. And you kind of adjust this with your cooking techniques, and we'll be learning about that. So we are ready to go, and let's start cooking. So let's start by boiling some water. Now, when you cook on a wood cook stove, we think about heat areas. We have hotter areas directly over the firebox. In fact, as I put my hand over here, I feel the intense heat. Where over here, since we've just started it maybe 15 minutes ago, it's really still warm enough that I can almost lay my hand on the actual stove itself, and it's not that hot yet. So I'm going to start by boiling some water. I don't want to wait forever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it directly over my flame. So I'm going to take my hook and I'm going to pull off the first and the second ring. to expose that open flame, and I'm going to take my pan and I'm going to put it directly over that heat so I can begin generating some heat within my water to get it to a boil. Now, with wood-burning stoves, this is very, very important. You need to capture the heat as much as possible because our heat's very precious with this. So I'm going to actually take a lid, cover this immediately so that I can begin to capture that heat within the water itself, which will help it boil faster. Of course, we could also add a little bit of salt, and that will help out too. So our water is almost at a boil. It's very, very close. I want to give it just a little more intense heat. So I'm going to go ahead, open up my firebox just a little bit. That's going to throw in a little more air, and that's going to jump up our heat even further, bring our water to a boil fairly quickly. So our water is coming up to the boil, so we are ready to add in our pasta that we're going to make. That come around. And there we go. So we're going to go ahead and add in our pasta. And just push that down. Let that come back to a boil. And we will put a lid on it and let that boil. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move this over because I've got a lot of heat over in this corner, and you can see that it's boiling, and then I'm going to be ready to add my saute pan right over our same flame. You can see I still have my rings out, and I'm heating up my saute pan, getting some nice cooking going here, and we're going to be ready to start sauteing our chicken.